All right. Well, folks, welcome to Faith, Family, and Friends. I've got somebody from home tonight, and I love interview people from home. Retired game warden, Wayde Carter, who's actually an instructor, still working. Wayde, you have done so many cool things that I didn't know about. I'm just going to welcome everybody and then give a little rundown, and we're going to get into the meat of it's going to be hard for me not to focus just on the dogs because I'm such a dog lover. And you know that from the times that we boarded our black lab Sam, God rest his soul, at your place there. So Wayde Carter is from Marshville, folks. If you don't know him, a lot of people from down east, I hope, are watching tonight or will later when we post this up on YouTube. 34 years of experience in criminal justice, conservation law enforcement, and he has also served in the roles of corrections officer, patrol duty, patrol sergeant, police officer, district game warden, and game warden corporal, a position which he, I think, just before your retirement, Wayde, in 2017, 24 years as a Maine game warden. And during his career, he received 2 exemplary service awards, a meritorious service award, 12 canine medals. I love that. So we'll try to stop and talk about that whole thing. And 20 commendation letters. I think you just sold your boarding kennel and grooming business, right?
We just closed it. Just too busy. Got too many irons in the fire, and I've got family spread out, grandkids in Florida and a son in Florida, so we're trying to slow down a little bit so we can visit.
That's good. That's a wise choice, and I'm sure your wife was all game for that.
Yes.
For how long did you do the boarding kennel?
We did just over 15 years. We did the boarding kennel.
Wow. And part of that, you were raising German Shepherds. You still going to do that, or?
We'll probably still breed Shepherds. We bred both Labs and Shepherds, but we're down to just the Shepherds now. So we'll probably keep a small part of the breeding going on with the Shepherds. Yes.
And we may talk a little bit more about that. Also, just I want to thank you for your service. You know, normally we do that with veterans, but the fact that you have served your local community, the state of Maine, and the way that you have for all those years and doing all these different things. I know here you were also a town manager for the town of Marshville for several years, and worked with grant writing, got a grant for a stream crossing to allow passage for brook trout and the Atlantic salmon, which is a really cool thing. And you're also an adjunct professor at UMM, University of Maine Machias, teaching ethics in law enforcement. Not a lot of occupations do that, and they probably should. I like to think about what the genesis of that may have been back in the day when they first started that. And then you were asked in 2019 by WCCC, Washington County Community College, to develop a conservation law enforcement program and improve the current criminal justice program. And so a lot of stuff. Highlights of your career, being on the Northwoods law. I asked my church the other day, I always let them know who's going to be on during the week. They'd like to tune into our interviews. And I said, how many people have watched the Northwoods? And there were quite a few hands that went up. And among all the what do you call them? The reality shows on TV, sometimes you can tell they're dramatized. From the few that I've watched Northwoods, and I like to have the time to watch some more and catch up on them and watch the archived ones. But that seems to be one that seems to be very real and truthful, and no need to dramatize it because there's plenty of drama in it. And so I would like you to talk about how that made you feel and what it was like. And really on the heels of Bill Livesey, and we had a great interview with him in his book and his years of being a Maine warden, being an out-of-stater Maine warden, and retiring and then being undercover. How well did you know Bill? I just wanted to check in with that and see.
I worked with him. I worked with him on some of the takedowns. And so I knew him fairly well. He was a distance apart from me, so we didn't work together a lot. But some of the takedowns I was on. He was the reason that we were there. So great guy to talk to. Really, he's
excellent. He and his wife in Florida now. I think they're Christian ministry, house parenting down there, and so his book is available out there. But I'm sure you could write one too, Wayde. But let me just get into the weeds of how. You know, as I mentioned to you earlier and texted you, your faith journey, if you had to kind of sum up, I know that you're Christian parents, strong faith there, Machias Valley Baptist Church for years. And your dad was a Maine warden and retired, right? From that. So kind of talk about how that was, did you take it for granted that you had Christian parents? Were there rebellious years, as so many of us have, if we've been raised in a Christian home? And how did you find your way back to the Lord, if that was true? And maybe talk about how that God planted the seed of becoming a game warden in your heart, not just because your dad did it, although I'm sure that was a big reason. So
like you said, my grandparents were Christians and involved in Machias Valley Baptist Church, and my parents. In fact, they were instrumental in getting the Machias Valley Christian School started.
yes, they were.
So
Yeah.
I grew up in a Christian home, very, very fortunate,
Mhm.
and attended Machias Valley Baptist Church. And actually, the first year the school was open, I transferred to Machias Valley Christian in the 6th grade.
Mhm.
And so I actually graduated from Machias Valley Christian in 1987.
Cool.
And then went on to Cedarville University down in Ohio, and that's where I met my wife. My wife's from Ohio, so
Okay.
so I was down there a couple of years, and I knew from a young age, just listening to the stories of my dad talk about catching poachers and
Yeah.
having all the wardens sitting around the table. I knew that that's really what I wanted to do. And if it was God's will, that's what I was going to do.
Mhm.
So I got married after attending Cedarville, came back here.
Mhm.
I worked for Hancock County Sheriff's Department while I applied for warden service, and I actually applied for Border Patrol as well.
Oh, really?
And I actually got hired by Border Patrol, got a job offer from Border Patrol and warden service the same week.
Oh, my
And
goodness.
I had to make a decision.
Yeah.
And I really felt strongly about going to work for the Maine Warden Service. My great grandfather was a warden. My father was a warden.
Wow.
So my seed was planted in the warden service. And I love Maine and I love the outdoors.
Uh-huh.
So it only seemed right that it was a fit. So
Yeah.
um,
That's awesome.
Debbie Palman did my background check, and she was one of the first ones instrumental in starting the canine unit for the Maine Warden Service.
Mhm.
And I had always had an interest in working dogs. So when a warden actually called me before I knew I'd gotten hired, and he said, "Yeah, well, welcome aboard." And I'm like, "Oh, really? I hadn't heard yet." It was kind of comical. He said, "Oh, well, keep that between you and I." I thought maybe you knew, but shortly thereafter, I got the invite to warden service, and that was in 1993.
93.
And
Yeah.
I immediately started out in canine
Wow.
under Debbie Palman's instruction, and it was there was 3 of us: Sergeant Roger Gay,
Uh-huh.
Debbie Palman, and myself. So I started right out in canine. I was very fortunate. After about a year in, I got my first German Shepherd, and then the story goes from there.
Yeah.
So
what would you attribute your interest? Had you grown up with dogs in the home as a lad and just had that?
Yes, I had.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had labs, and I actually had a Brittany Spaniel, and actually I trained the lab and the Brittany on partridge and ducks.
Wow.
So I had a deep interest in dogs. I had a love for dogs, and I could see how valuable they would be in law enforcement, especially fish and game law enforcement type program. So
wow. So your first dog, what was it, a German Shepherd? Or
female German Shepherd. Her name was Miranda. And of course, when they told me I was hired, they told me I was going to Southern Maine, which I wasn't very excited about that.
That's the other Maine.
They were sending me down to Berwick, and you talk about a small state. We were going down. My mom and my dad and my wife and I, we were headed down in the vehicle, and one of the toll booths said, "Yeah, are you Wayde Carter, one that just got hired by Warden Service?" And I said, "Yeah, well, don't rent an apartment in Berwick. You're not going to Berwick anymore. You need to check with the main office in Augusta." So talk about a small world. So I got sent to Daquam, and I don't know if people know where that is, but you go to Ashland.
Help me out.
Go to the other Maine. It was on the Quebec border. So you drive to Ashland, you get on the reality road, and you go 90 miles in on a dirt road. And the first 2 years of my career was spent at a warden camp, a 2-bedroom. Well, I wouldn't even call it a bedroom. A queen size bed wouldn't even fit in one of the bedrooms. So my wife and I slept on a pull-out couch. And there was a forest ranger there and a U.S. Customs agent. So that was how big the town was, just the three of us. And I patrolled there for 2 years. So I went from Berwick to Daquam.
So you must, I'm thinking you probably weren't as busy those first 2 years as you were later in the rest of your career, just being remote, or maybe you were.
Daquam was definitely a game warden spot. It wasn't great for family, but my wife, she made do of it. I mean, she packed up the family, and we had 2 kids. My oldest daughter and my middle son, they came in, and so she enjoyed a year and a half, 2 years off from working, and lived there. They even had radio in the house, and that's how she got a hold of me. If she got a complaint at the house, she would call actually on the police radio, and get a hold of me. So it was that remote. That's about the only way you could get out. But I loved it. It wasn't the greatest area for a family, but I learned how to be a woods game warden in that area. So not a lot of complaints. You go out and you find your own work. You investigate and patrol the area and look for clues. So not a lot of calls coming in, but it was a great 2 years for me. So
that's cool. And so after that, did they move you, or did you see a different opportunity arise where you could be close to the down East Maine and your roots?
So from there, there was a couple openings. One came open in Washington County, and back in my home area, and there was an opening in Norwich Walk, and I put in for both. I ended up getting Norwich Walk. It went by seniority. I ended up getting Norwich Walk, and so I spent a couple of years in central Maine. And then after a couple of years there, the Wesley Patrol came up. And the neat thing about that is Wesley has a warden camp. And when my father was a game warden, we lived there. My mother, my father, my sister, and I. And then I was able to go there with my 3 kids, and we lived there for a couple of years in that same warden camp. So it was kind of interesting.
That really is cool. Wow. So your correction, your work with the corrections officers and patrol and all that, was it more of another stream of income to supplement, or just that you wanted to be more involved in that in and out between your career as a warden?
So when I graduated high school, I wasn't old enough for the Maine Warden Service. So they were building a new jail in Machias, and right out of high school, I applied to be a corrections officer, and I got hired as a part-time corrections officer there. So that was my corrections. I worked there for about a year. Shortly after that, Hancock County Sheriff's Department was hiring a patrol deputy. And that's where I worked as a patrol deputy for 3 years prior to getting hired for Maine Warden Service. And I really enjoy police work. Not as, probably it wasn't as exciting, and I didn't like it as well as warden work, but I work for Machias PD and Washington County Sheriff's Department. There's not a lot of interest in going into law enforcement now. So us older guys, we're hanging on and filling shifts as they need us. So
that's great.
So that was my career in the law enforcement.
So maybe you could speak to us about how the game wardens, and maybe Maine is exceptional, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, in terms of the way that it works with regular local, county, and state law enforcement. And I think it was just a few years ago that the Maine game wardens were given the right to be armed, or was it different before that? Or maybe you could explain some of that, and how that you guys have worked with them for several years. So
Maine Warden Service has always been armed. The forestry, Maine Forest Service, they're the ones that just recently got armed. Yes. Yep. No, Maine game wardens have always been armed, but we in the remote areas like Washington County, or even in Taquam, you're basically the only law enforcement. So a lot of times you work hand in hand with the deputy sheriffs, the state police, and the local town officers. So I really worked really good with all those agencies during my whole career, and had some really great friendships over the years. We didn't care what color the uniform was or what shape the badge was. The same people that were poaching were the same people that were doing the drugs, and vice versa. So we were all on the same team.
Yeah.
And it's the same as that today. We each have our specific duties, but if we don't share the information with each other, we're not as effective.
Yeah. And you would think that that would be true. And it generally probably is across the board, across the nation. I think TV shows and reality shows like to heighten the exceptional times when the FBI or local police, or whatever, one wants jurisdiction over the other, and it's this, ego thing. But I'm sure in your careers, you just intimated you didn't see any of that. Sounds like everybody worked together well. And and still down east, you might see a little bit of it in the administrative part, but as far as the officers that are on the road, you don't see that. You arrive at the call, and it doesn't matter what color uniform you're in, you get the job done, and you make friendships. And I hope it stays that way in Maine. That's one good thing about Maine. It's definitely different than some of your other states in your busy areas. We still have those great relationships. Yeah, and we could go down that road. We won't, except to say this. Maybe it's just more of a rural city thing. Not to sound biased against city police, because they do the best they can. But I think the nature of the beast, there's just so much turnover, high rate of suicide. I think probably higher in the city than maybe law enforcement and in the rural areas. But they just get so much going against them that it's probably the ego thing, and all that working together isn't quite as good as in the country, rural areas.
Right.
So
no, we depend on each other here, and it's definitely different. My son, so I have 8 kids. I have my oldest daughter. She does 911 dispatch for Washington County Sheriff's Office part-time. She was full-time there, but she moved on and has her own business now. But it was funny, both her and my youngest biological son started out in dispatch, and they would say, yeah, it's the only time we can tell Dad where to go. Legitimately. So they made a joke of that. But my 3 biological kids, because they were around when 9/11 happened, and they all committed to go into the military right out of high school. My oldest son was a Marine. He served in Afghanistan for a year, and my daughter, my oldest daughter, she spent a year in Afghanistan. And then my youngest biological son, Matt, he served in the Army National Guard, military police, so they're all in law enforcement. My son, my oldest son, is in St. Petersburg Police Department in Florida. So he works down there, and then Matt actually works for Washington County Sheriff's Department. And I get to patrol alongside him some of my shifts. So it's definitely fun. And my oldest daughter dispatches on the same shift, and they always say that it gets real busy when all 3 of us are working.
It gives us the idea that I'm sure that you did raise them as your parents, grandparents did, with a love for our country and a desire to serve our fellow man, which is sadly seems like in a lot of areas diminishing. Tell us how Northwoods contacted you, and it's on the Animal Planet, still on, and it's probably one of their more watched shows. I'm thinking how long that's been on the Animal Planet, and were you called for one of the first few episodes, and what was that like when you called?
So I was a little hesitant because you're on the spotlight, the camera's in your face, and the colonel and supervisors get to review the tapes, and we're all human, and I'm sure we all make mistakes. And so was a little nervous at first, and so
Uh-huh.
the first few episodes, the first couple of seasons, I wasn't involved in it, and finally they said, "Hey, Joe McBride's doing it. You want to,
Yeah.
you guys are partners. You ought to jump in and be on Northwood's Law." And it was a little nervous, I got to admit, the first few times, but it was really fun actually. And I got a call the other day. Said, "Hey, just saw you on Northwood's Law." And my students love it. They always look at it, but it's you feel responsible for the cameraman and all the crew that are with you, and you're going into places, sneaking around.
Mhm.
So it was a little gut wrenching for a bit, but I
Well,
enjoyed it actually.
I imagine that part of that, and I think you kind of implying it, that you want to be real and natural and do your job. You don't even, maybe even it's not so much the nervousness. So I'm sure there are some butterflies at first. And you don't want to play up to the camera, and maybe it speaks to the production crew, maybe for making you feel like, hey, don't worry, just go ahead and go about your business. I know that I had read somewhere that at first the Maine Warden Service didn't really want to do that. They weren't keen on the idea because maybe of some of those reservations that I just talked about. It's like, hey, we got to do our work. You guys might be in our way. How did that all work out? And because it's become, again, quite a popular series.
So the Colonel back then, Joel Wilkinson, he didn't want anything redone. He didn't want any of the. It was, they got it live or they didn't get it. He didn't redo anything.
Good.
So,
Yeah.
Which I think made the show a lot better.
Yeah, it sure does. Yeah.
It would take about an hour to wire up your truck, get all the cameras in your truck, get all the cameras on your body and the mics and stuff. So yeah, you had the start in the morning or whenever you started, you had that. And then at the end, they would take all the stuff off you and take everything out of your truck. And then they would download all the stuff. But a lot of times they couldn't be with you every day. So, but we needed to do business as usual. So if you were right in the middle of an investigation, you couldn't necessarily stop. So a lot of the stuff that they would film and start never got finished because they either weren't there when we caught up with the person, or they were with a different warden that day. So it was the planning that went into it to actually get a show so that you could air a case was a lot more difficult than one would think because they couldn't be with you every day.
Yeah, and I think that, like a lot of shows, cop shows and all that, mystery shows, unsolved mysteries, all that, that we as viewers get a vicarious pleasure. It's sort of perverse of getting that guy, want to catch that bad guy, and we feel secure, like, all right, maybe we become part of that whole process and that narrative. I'm sure that's part of what made it success and why we here in Michigan saw so many hands, not just guys, but gals too, in our church Sunday when they said they watched it. So,
so 15 minutes of airtime, they divided up into four different cases during the 1 hour show. That 15 minutes represents hours of taping. 20 to 30 hours a lot of times doing the prep work and trying to find the guy you need to interview. And so that 15 minutes, only represents a very small part of what the camera crew and the staff had to do to be able to make that show possible.
So this makes me ask this question, and maybe just taking the Northwoods part out of it, although it could overlap, but if you were to go back in your history and retire from Maine Game Warden Service, what would be your highlight of solving a case? I mean, I could probably break it down, but your most memorable. I mean, anybody ask you right now, not just me, but anybody. What was that one case you remember just comes to your mind all the time that maybe was satisfying, and maybe you could pick one that was frustrating and wish you would have turned out a little bit differently?
Yeah, I was thinking about that earlier when you sent me the messages, trying to think what my most memorable case. So there's so many.
Yeah.
The dog stuff, I was really excited about the dog stuff. And I remember the one case, the search and rescue. I really enjoyed search and rescue. It comes down to saving lives a lot of the times. And my most memorable case and I tell this to my class. It's usually the first search and rescue thing that I tell my class. Is I was called to the Sullivan area, and I was on a day off that day, and they had two girls get off the bus, and they went missing. They followed their dog into the woods, and when the parents realized they were missing, they called. And it was weather like we're having today, freezing rain, really cold, and it was miserable. And it was clearing off and getting cold, and because you're worried about hypothermia. And I think they were 6 and 7 or 5 and 7. And I got called to respond with my dog buddy, with my canine buddy, and I get there, and they've got a pillowcase for me already. And because everybody's watching the new guy get on the scene, they've got a helicopter in the air, they've got other canine units already out there in the woods, and I get there and I'm the new guy on the scene, and they're, the parents are hoping that I can produce something, and I'm nervous, obviously nervous, being the guy that they're looking at. But I showed the pillowcase to my dog, started the track, did a loop, and immediately come right back to the house. And I talked to the dad, and he said, yeah, that was one of the first loops I did. Well, when you think about it, the scent on the pillowcase is going to have everybody's scent from the home in it. So
there you go.
the dog just picked up the freshest scent, which was the father, and we did the loop and back. So I'm like, I'm not going to give up, and I started again. And we went deeper into the woods this time. The helicopter's overhead with the FLIR unit, infrared, so that they can see body heat to see if they couldn't pick up the girls. And they weren't picking up anything on the scanner. And I remember Debbie Bauman coming out and a couple of the other canines, and they're like, yeah, we didn't have any luck down in that area. And I'm like, well, I have a scent, I'm going to keep going. And I wondered, I had doubts in my mind. Okay, Debbie Bauman's been a career canine, and so you're worried, am I just wasting time? I get down in there, and the helicopter, the rotors are pushing the air down, and my dog's on a scent, but having a hard time staying on the scent.
Yeah.
And so I got on the radio and I asked if the helicopter could push off a bit and let me work, because I'm asking a multi-million-dollar piece of equipment to move off the scene. And you're kind of nervous. So I continue going, and my dog shows an interest in a brush pile. And a few weeks before that, my dog had shown an interest in a brush pile and ran in and got a bunch of porcupine quills in his nose.
You didn't want to do that.
And so I'm very hesitant to let the dog go in, but I'm thinking, okay, I got to trust my dog, because that's one thing that we always talk about. Look, you've trained your dog, you need to trust your dog. So I did. I put my trust in the dog. I let go of the lead, and the dog went into the brush pile, and the dog started barking, and I was waiting for the yelp, because I was still not convinced that it wasn't a porcupine. And all of a sudden I heard some whimpers, and I'm like, I was just like, oh my word, it's them. So crawled in and got the two girls out of the brush pile. And I can remember, because I'm a dad, I was a dad then too. And I can remember picking up both girls, and we had about a mile walk out, and some of the wardens were meeting me. I'll carry one of them. Nope, I'm carrying both of them. And I was able to deliver both those girls to their parents. And I have no doubt that they probably wouldn't have fared well by the next morning.
How far away from their home were they?
They were about a mile from their house.
That's a ways. At that time of year, the storm,
right,
being young.
Right.
Was the dog with them that they had followed?
No, the dog had come back home. The dog had since returned home before, so there was no dog with them. I think they just got turned around, but that was one of the reward. That was one of the awards, the recognitions that my dog got me. But that one always comes to mind.
Have you seen them since then?
I have not. No. It would be. So I've seen a few people that have come up to me and said, yeah, you were the one that found my uncle, or found. So I have, but I've never met those parents again, or those kids. So. Oh,
interesting. So I know it's probably hard to pick a bad one, but by bad, I'm just thinking of maybe the way you wish it had gone out, and just maybe the frustration of it. Because I mean, any job that we do, it's not always, you put all the hard work in, doesn't always work like that particular incident did. Yeah.
Trying to think of any of the big cases might have had. I mean,
Yeah.
you were always always weighing, you catch people in the district attorney's office would be like, no, we're not gonna charge them, or there's not enough information,
Mhm.
and you gotta look at what their job is, and their job is to convict. And even though we don't believe that that those cases should find someone guilty that isn't guilty, but we've
Right.
done all the work into it, but it's
Yeah.
truly up to the judge and up to
That
the
must be
district
hard.
attorney to take it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this one case, my dad actually went with me, and it was Joe McBride was with me.
Yeah.
We got a guy for running down a moose intentionally.
Mm.
And you could put the bumper mark right on the back legs, and you could follow the tracks down the road.
Mhm.
And that one went to court, and they were found not guilty. And it's just frustrating.
Yeah. After all the work.
But
Yeah.
it's beyond a reasonable doubt, and obviously
Yeah.
there was some kind of reasonable doubt there, and that's the system we have, and it's a good system.
Yes, it is.
We certainly don't want to convict somebody that's innocent,
Right.
but a lot of work goes into them.
Uh-huh.
And some of the OUI cases that I had, the driving under the influence, those are just difficult when they get thrown out or when they're not prosecuted.
Wow. So I've got to ask you, have you ever had a favorite dog that you've trained? Oh, it's hard to pick one.
I have a favorite dog, and he's tattooed on my back,
Oh
actually.
my gosh! Wow.
And his name was Buddy, and he was the one that got me 80% of the recognition that I got. And I took him to Hurricane Katrina with me, and we recovered bodies. He was a cadaver dog, and we recovered bodies down there after the aftermath. We were down there for 8 weeks, 2 4-week stints, and he ended up with nasal and throat cancer from the chemicals that he smelled down there.
Oh.
And I had dogs after him, but it wasn't the same. I had a special relationship with Buddy, and he saved my neck more than once, and just one of those ones that you think about all the time.
Yeah.
He was great with the family.
Wow.
So it's
That's
my kids said, yeah, you ought to get a tattoo on your back, and I did. They had it. The woman designed a badge and canine Buddy, and I ended up getting it on my back. But I think about him all the time. Great dog.
I imagine you do. Wow. Well, in closing, and we usually like to close in prayer. Maybe you could be thinking of some things that maybe we could pray for you in terms of anything that you're struggling with, or your family, or the area there. We're so glad that one of the Down East friends that we both know was rescued the other day, and that's another thing, because we talked about search and rescue. But it must give you quite a bit of pleasure being able to still teach and train up guys and gals thinking of making game warden their career or working in law enforcement. What's it like having been down to Washington County Community College working there?
I enjoy it. I left warden service before I wanted to. I got injured and couldn't stay. That wasn't my choice. That was God's choice. That's the only way that I can think of it. It was my time to leave.
Sure.
My dad was dying of cancer then. So it did give me some time off to spend with him. And my grandson, my first grandson was along, and so I took care of him for a couple of years. But the job at Washington County Community College came along at a time in my life where I was bored, and I was anxious, and I felt like I wasn't giving back. When they contacted me and asked if I was interested in teaching part-time, and then that turned into full-time, it filled an emptiness. And I needed to do something, and this country needs game wardens. It needs law enforcement officers. It needs ethical young men and women to step up to the plate and fill the shoes of us that are retiring.
Amen.
And
Right.
to be a part of that and training these young students at both Washington County Community College and part-time at UMM, I've seen some great prospects, and I can't wait until they pin the badge on. I've had a couple of students. One of them just got hired for Washington County Sheriff's Department. Her name's Abby. She does a really good job. And I'm sure there'll be more. But it's great to be able to prepare them for a career like I had, and to fill those empty slots with ethical people that are going to make a difference.
Yeah, because in the news we see so much attrition in the law enforcement across our country that, and we need to inspire young people to enter that, know the dangers are there, and really be a support around them too, the churches, communities, other jobs and people that just, and really to thank them for their service and turn the blue light on or whatever, it is.
It's hard. There's a lot of stress in law enforcement.
Sure.
Well, the suicide rate is really up there, and I saw a lot of bad stuff as for the 33 years. I'm still seeing stuff when I fill part-time shifts, and our churches need to pray for our law enforcement officers and support them, and a lot of times we don't want to admit that we need the help or that we need the support. We're kind of proud that way, but really the churches should band together and pray for our law enforcement.
And with that,
they're the front line here.
With that particular thought in mind, because your mind rehearses those really difficult situations that you encounter when you don't want to, I'm sure, and how to be emotionally stable and do your job despite all that you've seen without it making you less sympathetic or empathetic about. That must be a difficult balance, I'm sure. And so I think as a church prays, we need to remember that how hard that would be, just try to put ourselves in your shoes for a little bit. So, wow. Yeah. Any last comments? And we'll close in prayer.
Yeah, no, I really enjoyed my career. Because we adopted 5 kids, and it's been interesting. The drug problems here in Washington County, a lot of those kids came from homes where drugs were rampant, and definitely a difficult time, for everyone here in Washington County, everyone in the United States with the drug epidemic.
Yes.
But we had 23 foster kids in and out of our home, and adopted 5. And I think the fact that I was in law enforcement and could show them, what a real dad was like, and a police officer, a law enforcement officer. They saw me in uniform, and I think that definitely made a difference.
Positive role model on both ends.
Yes.
And really, we have to say that you literally are a chip off the old block with your grandparents and your father. And I'm sure he was proud before he passed. And I'm sure you think of him often as you must do, buddy. And we just want to thank you for your service. It's been a great time being on the air with you in a broadcast. And I'll send you a copy of the YouTube version of this later this week, Wayde. And we'll continue to pray for home. I will. The drug problem and all that's going on. We'd like to think that there are some great, besides the work you've done in adopting and fostering parents, but Arise is doing a great job. I know the churches are.
Yes.
And keep praying for all that, because it's, the Bible says the end times is going to get worse, and we need to help each other work through all of this. So, well, let's pray. Amen. Thank you so much, Wayde, for being on. Lord, I just thank you so much for Wayde and his family and the legacy, Lord, that you've let him into. And it's nothing that he's really doesn't sound like ever taken for granted or had any kind of ego about, just so humble and thankful for his family history, all that he's learned and taught and been through. And I pray that you continue to give him health and strength with his wife and his kids, grandkids, Lord, and all the contacts, folks that he comes in contact with, and the mentoring too of these students and the relationships that he has built over the years, Lord, that would all come back. And even that, the spiritual aspect of that as young men and women see the quality of character, that it wouldn't just be, well, he's lucky, or it's the bloodline, or some of that may be true, Lord, but it's you. May you draw men and women and boys and girls to you as good men like Wayde are put in positions where they lay their lives down, really, quite literally, on the line through the years. Thank you for his service. And we thank you for our time, and pray that anybody who's been watching this broadcast tonight, who's been inspired, maybe even take up a career, becoming a game warden or working in law enforcement, or maybe they've seen something that has sparked their emptiness in their heart, maybe give their life to Christ, Lord. That would make both of us real pleased tonight, Lord. Thank you so much for our time together. We thank you. Pray a blessing upon the Carter family. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. God bless you, Wayde. And thanks for taking care of my dog the few times that you had Sam. I
All
missed
right,
you like you missed Buddy.
Thank you.
God bless you, brother.